We will be monitoring the chat function throughout the event, so please make use of it with questions and comments. I'm sure you don't need me to remind you that this is a public event, so please keep these well-mannered, as they will be posted on the SEDA website after the event along with this recording. The backroom team will be gathering the questions together as we go, and I will ask as many of them as time allows after this afternoon's presentations. This event has two purposes. It is the formal launch and discussion of the SEDA commissioned report, which was published 2 weeks ago. And secondly, it is the formal launch of SEDA Land, a new section of the Scottish Ecological Design Association that is dedicated to investigating those issues that the 6 conversations highlighted as important and which we sought to address in the report. The ambition for SEDA Land is that it will make a difference in shaping future policy and practice of land management and use in Scotland. You will hear more about SEDA Land throughout the event, and we will give you details of how to become involved at the end. So please stay tuned in until then. This event should last roughly an hour and 20 minutes. We shall hear from Deb Roberts of the James Hutton Institute, without whose support the 6 conversations would not have been possible, and my co-author, Davy McCracken, will outline the content and key messages from the report. We have 2 poems specifically commissioned for the report, which will be read to us by their authors, and we shall hear from another 3 great speakers who contributed to the 6 conversations. They have been asked to pick out areas of key interest from the report. This will be followed by a short discussion on the most popular points raised in the chat function before we confirm details of SEDA Land and other upcoming SEDA activities. Before I turn to Deb, let me swiftly say a little bit about SEDA and why we wanted to hold these events and commission this report. Founded in 1991, SEDA is a registered charity and a membership organisation that promotes ecological design across Scotland. SEDA aims to promote the design of communities, environments, projects, systems, services, materials and products, it's a long list, which enhance the quality of life and are not harmful to living species and planetary ecology. Land issues are not new to SEDA. For example, in the summer of 2013, Jeff Squire guest edited an issue of our magazine, Exploring Natural Capital, and we've had issues on permaculture, circular economy, sustainable communities, and many more topics over the years. SEDA's strength lies in promoting discussion between members and stakeholders, and we want to set up a forum in which challenges such as climate change adaptation and mitigation, soil depletion and biodiversity can be considered at a crucial time when Scotland is dealing with Brexit, a pandemic, and introducing new regional land use partnerships. The response to the 6 conversations was staggering. It seems issues have been discussed across sectors which didn't really seem to have happened before. It was always intended to summarise the most important themes and best ideas that came out of the 6 conversations, and we have distilled these in the report in the hope that they influence policymakers in their work. I hope a few are attending online today. The report is free to download from the SEDA website, and printed copies can be purchased while stocks last at the SEDA online website. Now let me introduce Deborah Roberts. Debs is the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Science at the James Hutton Institute and holds an honorary chair in the Business School at the University of Aberdeen. Her research experience spans agricultural, economics and regional science, and she has undertaken work for a wide range of funding bodies, including the European Commission, DEFRA, ESRC, the Scottish Government, Forestry Commission, Scottish National Heritage and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Deb's research interests span a number of interrelated areas. In relation to policy, she has focused on modelling the economy-wide impacts of changes in farm, forestry and structural policies using social accounting methods and general equilibrium models. She has also carried out research looking at farm household behaviour and dynamics of fuel poverty. Over to you, Deb.
Thanks, Richard, for that introduction. And I'd just like to say on behalf of all of my colleagues, how very pleased we were at the James Hutton Institute to be able to help contribute to the organisation and the discussions that formed part of these 6 land conversations. Now, the approach that SEDA adopted for the land conversations, which included involving artists, as is going to happen this afternoon, I think was really great in terms of capturing people's imagination. And I certainly think it helped people think more outside the usual silos in terms of how they think about land use and the future of the challenges that face land across Scotland. The conversations definitely had a more dynamic feel to some of the other workshops that I've gone to, and I have to admit, at the end of the six weeks, I began to wonder what I was going to do at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon from now on, because I got quite used to each week participating in the conversations. Now, as we will hear, the issues that were raised across each of the 6 conversations were highly interconnected and highly complex. If we want to access healthy and affordable food, it matters how we manage our land. If we want to think of ways of addressing the climate emergency, that's great, but we also have to think about the biodiversity crisis. And yes, we all want vibrant local communities, but these communities also have to deliver to the global challenges that we face. Now, it's in circumstances like that that having independent, objective scientific evidence is really useful, because it provides a basis and forms a solid grounds on which discussions can move forward. So we were really pleased to be able to provide information, for example, on how climate change is going to affect land capability for agriculture across Scotland over the coming decades. We were really pleased to be able to provide maps, for instance, showing which parts of Scotland are facing the most critical demographic change, which is going to lead to out-migration and possibly threaten the ability of those local economies to continue. So that was really useful, and hopefully it did provide a basis on which to identify opportunities for the future, as well as provide common ground for discussion. But for me, the conversations were equally as useful, because they identified where we need more science, we need more understanding. And so I took from it a lot of ideas that I hope other researchers in the Institute will also build into research plans going forward. Now, Scotland has a very strong science base in relation to land use. It has some unique long-term data sets. It has some unique scientific resources. It has a history of really good collaboration across research institutes and with universities. And most importantly, and I know this, it has many, many scientists that are really committed to making a change. Now, just as these conversations were ongoing, quite a lot of us, I guess, were having our first COVID-19 vaccination, or possibly second COVID-19 vaccination. And if ever there was an example of showing what science can achieve by working collaboratively, by working in new ways between the private sector and the public sector, and by working at pace, then we had that example. And I think Scotland is well placed to do similarly in relation to land use. So I just want to conclude by saying the James Hutton Institute, and I'm sure lots of other researchers across the whole of Scotland, very much look forward to working with SEDA going forward and addressing some of the challenges that are going to be raised this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you, Deb, both for your words and certainly for the wider involvement of the James Hutton Institute. We couldn't have done it without you. This moves us on to our next part of the presentation and our first poem of the afternoon. This is a world premiere for the poem Pame Heed, read to us by its author, Chris Pawiki. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Chris is a teaching fellow in literature and languages at Stirling University, and his poetry focuses on human and natural environments and how the natural and human worlds overlap one another. This poem was commissioned by the Open University. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And Richard, you pronounced Chris wonderfully well. Don't worry about Paviki, it's absolutely fine. It's I've also cheated a wee bit in that I've not just written one poem, I've written a sequence of haiku. And the brief was to actually write poems about what an ecologically sound and healthy Scotland might look like. So there's just these 9 haiku, and just think of them as possible glimpses into a possible Scotland, I suppose. They kind of take you across different landscapes and seascapes, and they begin in the morning and they end at night. The overall title is Paying Heed. Lean on an old gate. A doe steps through the high grass. the gate creaks and gives. After the plough blade, goose down and vole bones glimmer in the dark turned tilth. Sheep bleat, stone chats chat on the dry stone radio. Lichen just listens. Snow in summer spills through this mossy wreck of wall, sweet blizzard of stars. Broken mussel shells gleam on the quayside, gulls rise on the harbour breeze. Atlantic sunlight, slow, vast plankton blooming tides. Life deepens and drifts. Rooks in the dusk trees bawl and yell, grievous angels crying down the sun. Chainsaws fall silent. Among cedars, a thrush sings on the edge of night. Now dream a hare's dream, rain on the harrow, moonlight on the barn owl's wing. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. Throughout the 6 conversations, we had artistic interludes from 18 different artists, including Chris, who read us 3 of his other fantastic poems. And it was a great way of reminding ourselves that the issues that we're discussing are not really about policies and statistics. They're about people, place and nature. I'm now delighted to be able to introduce my co-author for the report, Davy McCracken. Davy is Head of Department for Integrated Land Management, part of the Hill and Mountain Research Centre at Scotland's Rural College. After completing his PhD at the University of Glasgow in 1990, Davy worked for the Joint Nature Conservation Committee before joining Scotland's Rural College, where he was previously Professor of Agricultural Ecology. In that capacity, he led numerous projects aimed at addressing the relationships between farming systems and farmland biodiversity and highlighting the implications of policy change. He is a member of the editorial board of Pastoralism, a Springer Open journal, and of the Scottish Farmed Environment Forum and Scotland's Moorland Forum. He has also served on many panels and committees of the RSPB, Nature Scot, the Bean Goose Action Group, and Scottish Biodiversity Centre. Davy, tell us about the report.
Thanks, Richard. I'll just share my screen. And come on. If you could just confirm that you can see my screen okay.
I can, yes.
Yep, looks good. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So welcome, folks. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. Those of you that have seen the report will realise it's going to be very difficult to sort of summarise it all just within a sort of 10-12 minute period. So if you'll forgive me for that. Those of you that haven't read the report, there's a link to the report in the chat and also a link down in the sort of bottom left hand of the first screen here. Now, clearly, the focus of our 6 conversations was all on land use, and that focus really came through. This is the word cloud that's been extracted or created from the actual words in the report itself, and you can see community, land, sustainable, etc. are all sort of focusing through there. But once we started to dissect the detail in each of the sort of 6 hour discussions, the 6 2-hour discussions, it became clear that there was a whole host of other wider, just as important, interrelated sort of issues that also needed to be taken into account when speaking about land use and a future for new vision for land use in Scotland, whether that's the availability of affordable housing, jobs for young people, or not just use of land, but actually access to land in order to be able to use it. And while the conversations were ongoing, we entered the third of Scotland's land use strategy. And just before the conversations got started, Scottish Government had highlighted that there's a range of regional land use partnership pilots had been established. And so looking at land use, you could be forgiven for thinking that actually then we've already got it sewn up in Scotland. We have a land use strategy, we've got land use, regional land use partnerships in place. But one of the messages in the report you will see is, and we're not damning the regional land use partnerships at all in advance of them working, but it's clear from the discussions and the conversations that the wide range of issues that we actually have to deal with in Scotland, deal with in rural land and land use in Scotland, are more than just being capable of the land use strategy being able to actually address that. And so Richard and I, when we went through the listings of the conversations, we drew out 8 broad recommendations that we actually see as being important from a land use perspective and going forward. I'm just going to flag up all 8 of them very, very briefly as we go through the rest of this brief presentation. Others on the panel will talk about some, not necessarily all of those aspects, and then we can talk about them in more detail in the discussion. The first, Debs has already mentioned it. You know, we're recommending that we need a healthy food strategy in Scotland. Our food systems in Scotland are predicated on exporting food and drink out of the country to help with our wider rural economy. But it became clear in the discussions, the conversations, that there's too little focus on producing healthy products for use within local areas within Scotland, and particularly when you take into account the levels of obesity, but also food poverty that we actually have. But clearly, what we produce and what its purpose of is in Scotland is not just the only aspect. How that food is produced is also key. And so we're also recommending that Scottish Government and others develop an agroecology strategy to ensure that our food production and our food production practices, they're part of the circular economy, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they help support business, help support biodiversity, but also support local business opportunities based on those food production practices. And Nikki on the panel will speak a bit more about that in a few moments. And finally, from a strategic point of view, we also highlight the need for a much more sustainable placemaking and mending strategy. We need, it was clear within all the conversations, we need to see repeopling of our rural areas, and we need to expand existing industries and actually create opportunities for new industries in order to actually make rural areas much more vibrant going forward. And so again, we need to set these, we see a need to set these 3 new strategies alongside the existing land use strategy if we're to make real progress within Scotland. And related to that, having a strategy is not enough without any action on the ground. So simply having the strategies, we've had the land use strategy since about 2011, if not before. Simply putting new strategies in place won't be enough without the need for action, and that's partly where the discussion later on about SEDA and SEDA land will actually come in. Some of you may be familiar with this, others not. Hopefully you're all aware we've got an ambition to be net zero in Scotland by 2045. The graphic you have in front of you is simply annual temperatures, and where it's red on the graphic, and from about 1890 through until about 2018, 2019, I think, the last screen grab I took of this. The key point is where the column is red, that highlights where the average temperature in that particular year was way higher than has been normal in the previous 25 to 50 year period. And you can see quite categorically, hopefully at the right hand side of the graph, that actually we are already in a period of major sort of climate change within Scotland. And so 2 of the other recommendations that we've got, that we've made, speak directly to that. We're asking for, or recommending, that the land stewardship protocol, which currently is giving guidance and encouragement to land managers, should be strengthened by actually requiring land managers to actually include more information on the condition of soil on land, biodiversity on land, and job impact analysis of any major change in land uses that they are actually proposing. And related to that, we're also suggesting that all land holdings, or land holdings above a certain size, should be looking to provide climate impact certificates, again giving an indication of CO2 emissions associated with the land use. So Scottish Government and others will be able to actually track the emission levels, document improvements in those emissions, and actually highlight that land use change has had positive benefits going forward. As I started this part of the presentation, we have a target to be net zero by 2045. So we need to actually put metrics in place that allow us to actually know that we're on track to actually do that. And then with regard to, again, particularly with regard to the repeopling aspect, but also creating new business opportunities in our rural areas, we're also suggesting the need for much more coordinated investment in transport, energy and communications in these rural areas to ensure that they can be revitalised, and we do attract people to come, live, stay and work in these areas, and not just come and visit it for a short period of time as tourists, important though that may be for particular areas of Scotland. And if we want to stimulate more business opportunities, more job creations, then that doesn't just happen naturally overnight. We're also recommending the need for loans or seed funding to actually help stimulate innovation, help stimulate new business and new business startups in different parts of Scotland. Certainly education, as Tony Blair, and I'm certainly not Tony Blair or anything like him, quipped some number of years ago. It's highly important that we actually ensure that our education in Scotland at all levels is creating a climate conscious, motivated and skilled workforce in order to take advantage of all of these different aspects that we're recommending, from what you attending today and others who attended the conversations have actually highlighted. It's also important to highlight that all of these aspects are interrelated. It's not just doing any one of these won't be enough to actually make the difference that's actually needed. And we highlight throughout the report and throughout the sort of the media outputs that's happened since the report that radical change is actually needed in order to put these recommendations in place. But that radical change it is as much, if not just as important, to actually have radical change in the mindset as to how we actually manage land in Scotland going forward. And we need to move away from a single policy, single outcome type approach. We need to have much more in the way of a coordinated, place-based policy making focus. Now that in itself, as many in this call will be aware, is not in itself new. The need for such a place-based policies has been talked about for decades in Scotland. What will be radical and what is needed is to ensure that actually happens in practice and actually serves to make a real difference on the ground. Thank you, Richard. I don't know how I did there as far as time is concerned, but hopefully I didn't go over the time allocation. Just to give an overview of the key points from the report.
Thank you, David, for summarising the report so eloquently. And in fact, we are very slightly ahead of time at this stage by a few minutes, which is good. Clearly, as you can tell from what David said, the report aimed to distill down the complexities of the issues raised during the 6 conversations and address these with some logical recommendations which took account of the interrelated nature of the topics discussed, and I hope we've achieved that. Just a reminder to attendees, please do start posting questions in the chat function so that we can address those later on when we get to the discussion. Before that, I am delighted to be able to introduce our next three speakers, and I'll introduce them all together. They each contributed to the 6 conversations, and we have set them the unenviable task of highlighting a few of the issues that were addressed in 5 minutes each. They may be able to flex their elbows and take a few extra minutes as we're slightly ahead of time. Anyway, they are Ronald McDonald, who is Research Professor in Macroeconomics and International Finance in the Adam Smith Business School at Glasgow University. Prior to this, he held the Adam Smith Chair of Political Economy and the Bonar McPhee Chair of Economics. Ronald has acted as an advisor to numerous governments and public agencies. He has served on the Scottish Economic Society and was one of the founding directors of the Scottish Institute for Research in Economics. More recently, Ronald has written about the opportunities, radical reforms, and potential policy actions that governments can take post-pandemic to balance the health and well-being of their populations with maintained economic efficiency. We also have Nikki Yoxall of Grampian Grazers, who farms with her husband at Howe Mill in Aberdeenshire, producing beef from native and rare breed cattle, which contribute to the ecological restoration through mob grazing and agroforestry. They employ a low input system selling beef through direct sales. Nikki is currently undertaking an MSc in sustainable food and natural resources research, researching the ecological benefits of mob grazing, and is a farmer ambassador for the Soil Association. And we also have Mads Fischer-Moller. He is a professor of food policy at Scotland's Rural College and leader of the SRUC's upcoming Future Food Systems Research Centre, aiming at discovering transformational paths towards more sustainable food systems. Mads has arrived at SRUC from a career in food policy. He was policy advisor to the Danish government on nutrition, food, culture, gastronomy, and SMEs, and has most recently been responsible for all common Nordic food policy development and implementation in his position as senior advisor for food policy at the Nordic Council of Ministers. Here, Mads was also leader of the Nordic Food Policy Lab, an initiative from the Nordic Prime Ministers aimed at communicating Nordic food policy solutions global audiences through co-creating policy labs and active online outreach. So after all of that, over to you, Ronald, to start.
Thanks very much, Richard. It's very nice to be here today. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's widely accepted now that climate change and inequality are the 2 big ticket items coming out of the pandemic that our society needs to urgently address if we're to have a sustainable future. And I believe the SEDA conversations make a significant contribution in providing key policy recommendations for addressing these key issues in a Scottish context. Today, perhaps not surprisingly, I'm going to take a macroeconomic perspective in thinking about these issues, and particularly some of the key conclusions in the SEDA report. Specifically, I start with thinking about a simple textbook production process, which says that a country's GDP is determined by physical capital and labour inputs, where land is simply lumped in with capital and its use is ignored. Now, this is essentially the kind of model that was until comparatively recently portrayed in many textbooks, economic textbooks and elsewhere. And I think it's still a pervasive model today. And I think, as I'll argue, it underpins the operation of many corporations. As is now widely recognised, however, this model does not produce sustainable and equitable economic growth, since it ignores the depletion of other forms of capital, such as natural capital, social capital, and human capital, and it fails to recognise the need to accelerate the obsolescence of our existing carbon-based physical capital stock. Land, of course, is a key element of natural capital, and its use has critical implications for a huge range of issues, as discussed in the conversations. Although, unfortunately, there is widespread the recognition that we have to move to a more holistic approach to production, corporations and many firms, despite the ongoing ESG agenda, are still wedded to the more simplistic model of production, given their narrow focus on shareholder capitalism, the maximization of shareholder value, and an overfocus on financial capital. So in seeking to address inequality and climate change, I believe we've got to get to grips with the whole shareholder capitalism agenda. And I believe this comes across in a number of the conclusions in the report. So I'll now look at some of the specifics. The report is very clear that we need to rebuild social capital. In a number of the conversations, the role of the community, which is central to building social capital and trust in our society, that was emphasized in bringing about a sustainable future. For example, the important role of the community in identifying the benefits for themselves and the wider community of a change in land use was regarded as important. Communities have an important role to play in bringing about net zero targets, and their education in that regard is also important. And also the role of the community in managing land around them. And as David recommended, recommendation 6, to develop and implement a sustainable placemaking and mending strategy, really hits the social capital nail on the head, I think, because it specifically says that we must embrace local areas, facilitate community activities, encourage outdoor learning, and particularly, I think, important, devolve decision-making to local communities. I think this is especially important since going into the pandemic, social capital was declining quite steeply in Scotland as it is elsewhere in the UK. We've also got to rebuild human capital. The report makes that very clear. And this, I think, is a corollary of the social capital point, in that communities need to be made climate aware. We need to create a skill set for people that are aligned with this. This would seem especially important in the post-COVID new normal, where we badly need to tackle the scourges of inequality in its many forms, and particularly the consequences of the so-called gig economy. So as recommended in conclusion 7, where it specifically says, to this end, we need to equip people with the correct skills dovetail to where they live or would like to live, and the skills needed for expanding businesses in the evolving technology, land use, manufacturing, tourism, and the food and service sectors. We've also got to rebuild physical capital, as I mentioned in the introduction. It's important that we see an acceleration of the obsolescence of the existing capital stock, because it's basically a carbon-based capital stock. And I think we're going to have tax and regulation changes on emissions particularly to bring about the required changes in our existing physical capital stock. We also need to rebuild and sustain natural capital. Scotland, as we know, has an abundance of natural capital. And we're now creating renewable energy at sharply falling prices. And critically, we have the technology to store renewable energy in various ways. Affordable green energy, buttressed by good communications, will, I think, be crucial in creating the right environment for the creation of new businesses, which will also facilitate the revitalization and repeopling of rural areas. And this in turn will create sustainable jobs and economic growth. The pandemic has also highlighted the opportunity to repeople rural areas if the right infrastructure is in place. In joint papers with Don McRae, we argue that access to cheap, affordable green energy, which can, for example, be stored in the form of hydrogen, could create the rebirth of the crofting community model in rural areas, where, for example, you could have eco-industrial parks powered by renewable energy in local communities, creating well-paid and interesting jobs, which in turn, of course, leads to the repeopling of these areas. All of these points, I think, resonate strongly with recommendation 5 of the report, which Davy had on the screen a moment or two ago, in terms of coordinated infrastructure investment, specifically the need for investment in transport, renewable energy and communications, infrastructure to provide the conditions necessary to revitalize and repeople rural areas, and stimulate job creation and economic growth. I'd like to close by saying that I think recommendation 8, the setting up of a sustainable investment fund that provides affordable seed funding to businesses and communities, is I believe, crucial in bringing all of the aforementioned points about. It's very important, I think, because such a fund will be an important counterpoint to the overemphasis on financial capital in our society and the rent seeking that goes with that. And I think this has been the dominant paradigm in our society, and it is one of the key contributors to non-sustainable growth. And I think we've got to break that link going forward if we are to address climate change and the massive inequalities we face in our society today. Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop at that point.
Thank you, Ronald. That's fantastic. And if I can turn to Nikki now. Hello, Nikki, are you still with us?
Hi, folks. Sorry, yeah, I'm going to keep my video turned off just because my internet's pretty poor, but hopefully you'll have some nice pictures of cattle to enjoy whilst I speak. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I want to talk a little bit about agroecology and why SEDA are calling for the development and implementation of an agroecology strategy in Scotland and what that might look like quite literally in the field. Agroecology is essentially the application of ecological concepts and processes in farming, and it also recognises the role that people and communities have to play within those ecosystems, working with the natural world rather than in an ongoing battle to control and homogenise the farm landscape. Agroecological farmers aim to improve soil and plant health through increasing biodiversity and biomass, rather than relying on chemical inputs and destructive, oppressive methodologies. Agroecologists are concerned with fair markets, local food systems, wider ecosystem health, and its role in building farm resilience, as well as the integration of ancestral, regionally and locally appropriate knowledge and customs. Circular systems that recycle goods and nutrients, the building of synergies to enhance key functions across the food system, supporting production and multiple ecosystem services. Since the Green Revolution following the Second World War and various productivity-focused policy frameworks, we've increasingly separated farming and what many would call nature, relegating them to separate areas of land, separating them out in our education system and work sectors, and viewing them as entirely separate concepts. Nature-friendly farming is gaining traction in response to ongoing campaigning, practice sharing and lobbying, and we have to recognise that providing for nature around the edges of our farms isn't going to be enough to mitigate the impacts of or adapt in the face of the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. If we add in the third crisis of human health, whereby consumption of ultra-processed and convenience foods underpinned by a globalized, commodified food system that's responsible for millions of deaths a year, we really are heading towards catastrophe. And I'm not even going to touch on the economic enablers of such systems as covered by Ronald already. But what I can talk about is my experience as a farmer who's committed to producing healthy, nutritious food for my local community. My husband and I live in the uplands and are surrounded by beautiful glens, hills, burns and rivers, moorland, species-rich grasslands, montane scrub, and both new and very old woodland. We love where we live and recognise the beauty of the diversity and abundance of plants and animals. And as such, our farming management is undertaken with those two concepts in mind, diversity and abundance. Research tells us that resilient food systems are diverse systems, and the natural world around us reflects this. Just look at the verges in the height of summer. We know the land we farm across can produce an abundant and diverse array of plants, which offer excellent nutrition for our herd of native breed cattle. So herding these cattle with electric fencing, securing their access to water is the bulk of our job. This movement allows them a fresh bite of pasture regularly, reducing overgrazing and ensuring adequate recovery time to optimize photosynthesis and plant abundance. This promotes healthy root structures and soil biology, which in turn increase soil water holding capacity and infiltration, which is critical in uncertain climatic changes. These actions all help to build soil organic matter, sequester carbon, and regenerate land. Our job is to create the right opportunity and space, the when and the where, for the cattle to do their job. The cattle's job is to select a balanced diet for themselves every day, feed soil biology through trampling grass residues, dunging, and urinating. And all of this comes very naturally to them. And with careful management, they can play a key role in creating healthy ecosystems. Instead of extracting all we can from the land to feed as many animals as possible, we aim for maximum sustainable output, reducing the need for bought-in products, feed, treatments and services. In fact, all we buy in is some hay. By implementing agroforestry, which is the intentional integration of livestock and trees, we can ensure our herd access a broad range of nutrients from browsing, have excellent scratching posts to promote natural behaviours, as well as shade and shelter throughout the year. We do work on a pretty small scale, but this is limited only by land access. But there is no reason agroecology can't be scaled up. There are some fantastic examples of agroecological farming and crofting across Scotland, where land managers are realising that by working with ecological processes and adopting an agroecological mindset, they can produce healthy food, not just commodities, for local communities, reduce their need for inputs and increase profitability across a triple bottom line. Local food systems rely on local businesses and local skills, networks of individuals who play meaningful roles in creating thriving communities. If we spend less on stuff, chemicals, inputs, the infrastructure that holds up intensive agriculture, we can increase profit margins, potentially employ more people on our farms, which contributes to a more vibrant rural community, helping us to repeople the land and make a net positive contribution environmentally, enabling soil health, clean air and water quality. Rather than viewing the world through a deficit lens, looking to offset our impact and account for the damage we do through various trade-offs, agroecology reminds us that it hasn't always been this way and that there is an alternative that can feed us as well as nourish us more deeply, connect us with the land and build community. We just need to open our eyes and ears to understanding old learnings in new ways, putting ourselves into the ecology and thinking more holistically.
Thank you, Nikki, for that. That was wonderful. And lastly, can I turn to Mads?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. And I want to start by congratulating SEDA on these lovely 6 conversations. I came to Scotland last summer and I've learned a lot in my time here, but I think these conversations and your approach in these conversations to bring a multitude of stakeholders together to discuss these very difficult issues from a very creative approach is very different what I had experienced as a boring old civil servant in the Nordics. And hopefully that approach can also be maybe one of the strengths going forward, because there is no lack of reports that shows the need for change. We know almost everything we need to know about what to do, but the problem is that it isn't universally recognized that change is needed yet. And I think having good communications with communities about their view of change, their role, their visions of the future is super, super important in order to mobilize the energy that's needed to actually have an impact with this very ambitious agenda you're setting out. And thank you, Nikki, for farming with the maximum sustainable output, also with relearn old ways of farming, but also actually to take, I think what's important is also to take what we have been good at and develop heavily on that. So as one suggested in chat, say, okay, what can we be the pioneers of oat milk? It is crazy that Scotland is importing millions of liters of oat milk from Scandinavia that we could produce ourselves. I think what I see from my kind of still outside view on this is that there's still a lack of understanding of the need for change. I don't know if anybody was as geeky as me to listen in on 2.5 hours of debate in the Scottish Parliament last week when they talked the future of food in the light of the upcoming food and drink fortnight. And everyone in the Scottish Parliament started by saying Scottish food is excellent, Scottish food is green. If just the world could learn from Scotland, everything would be fine. And that's simply not the case. So I think what is needed is to say change is needed. Look at the recent report from the National Food Strategy for England. I know we might be a little bit shy of taking points from England, and taking them just straight to Scotland and implementing it, and I can't recommend that. But that report actually set out a super important agenda regarding the need to integrate, for instance, as David just showed us, the health plan with the agroecology plan, with new business opportunities. We have a great opportunity to rethink food and rethink our land use accordingly, but we need to acknowledge the need for change. That plan sets out a very harsh view of status quo. It almost states that current suckler beef and sheep farming is waste. Not that we have anything against sheep or beef, but there isn't really a market for it. If you look at these sectors, they don't make money, but what they do make is 10% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, even though they only account for less than half a percentage point of our GDP. It's almost as harmful as subsidizing coal production, and we have gone away from that. Should we rethink our land use, not least when it comes to farming? Probably yes. And it's not to say that what everyone does is wrong, not at all. I'm sure that, for instance, what Nikki is doing is great because it's actually delivering on other of our top priorities, for instance, delivering on nature and biodiversity conservation. But to the extent we're using 87% of our agricultural lands for beef and sheep and fodder for the two, even though it's not really what we need in our diets. So having a good conversation about what's actually needed, and then having this approach that SEDA is laying out to show what opportunities are there locally if we are acknowledging a need for change. And to be honest, to be fair, the Scottish government is underway with some of this. So we have debates around the future of agricultural subsidies. There's an implementation, but there's even a consultation out at the moment that I can only advise all of you here to answer to, both on a future of agricultural subsidies, but also on vertical farming possibilities, on vegetable production. We have the Food Standard Scotland, who really came out with a strong strategy on challenging tackling our health crisis in Scotland and nutritional crisis here, where we are eating worse and worse. And we have a consultation on local food. We even have the Good Food Nation bill that should come to discussion in Parliament within the next couple of years. But there is a lack of thinking interlinked with these things. So the future farming will solve the climate crisis by reducing greenhouse gas emissions per cow. But then we also have vegetables, and we need a more integrated approach where we have a vision. Where I come from in Denmark, there's a vision about where the food system is going. It is about strengthening green protein production and reducing meat, not to the degree that meat is not in our food system, but a clear direction that shows this is the way we're going, guys. And that's just inspiring more people to come to the agricultural colleges. I was at a meeting and we had 350 people in the center of Copenhagen coming to an event where we discussed compost and urban farming. 350 highly educated folks who just want to be in this conversation because there's a clear direction of travel. If we don't acknowledge the need for change, then we can have all the policies we want tinkering around the edges. But I do think we need a holistic view of where we're going. And hopefully post-COVID, we have a pretty strong outline of the agenda, which is reduce greenhouse gas emissions, be a positive contribution in the biodiversity crisis, and reduce inequalities, both when it comes to economic opportunity and health. And from my position as professor in food policy, I can see we can have a food system that delivers on all of this, that creates new opportunities for new businesses arising. But we just need to acknowledge change is needed, and we need to have local conversations where we get all the energy from all the stakeholders and harvest them, bring them to light, so that also the mainstay stakeholders, the politicians, can see the energy is there. We just need to stimulate them a little bit, and they can show the way forward for a more green and in equal Scottish society based from the food side of things.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Mads. And that's taken us back to just about where we should be on time-wise. So many thanks to all three of our members of our panel. We're now going to be rejoined by Davey and by Gail Halverson for our questions and answers session. The 6 conversations were very largely Gail's idea, and she has been truly inspirational in her efforts to make these happen. So if we're all assembled and back in, the first question I'd like to go to, we've had quite a few questions coming in, so that's fantastic, and we'll try and bracket them together given the time we've got available. But the first one I'd like perhaps Ronald to address, but please everybody else come in as well. And I'm bolting a couple of questions together and adding a bit of my own, which is, you talked about obviously economics and economic growth. How do you see us avoiding the downsides of growth? And by that, I suspect the questioner means the excessive use of resources in a linear system rather than a circular economy. How do you believe taxation and subsidies will play into the rural economy? And perhaps you could start by actually giving us your description of what you see as economic growth. Do you see this purely as a continuous growth in GDP?
Well, no, I'm keen, as I did during my contribution to the rural economy conversation, to emphasize sustainable economic growth, and particularly in terms of the maintenance of some targets for natural capital. And we discussed these back in that conversation. And that was really the kind of context of what I was saying today, that the traditional growth model basically ignores the impact it's having on other forms of capital, other crucial forms of capital, such as social capital, human capital, the actions of the corporation in simply trying to maximize profits is one in which you find that they don't take account, obviously, of the impact they're having on natural capital, social capital, or human capital. And these important capital items get depreciated and depleted. And so we need, as I said, a more holistic model to engage that. So the kind of growth model I'm thinking of is a sustainable model, and that obviously has to be spelled out in more detail than I had time to do today. But I certainly don't favor a zero growth model because, well, we've got a number of countries, particularly in Africa, which will need growth to pull the residents out of poverty. In wealthier countries, clearly there's going to be an ongoing demand for public services. Growth in, the demand for health is going to rise inexorably. And we will need sustainable growth to fund these services, and also to fund, obviously, the kind of macro policies that are needed when we have shocks to our economies, such as the massive fiscal policy that has been engaged in during the pandemic. That obviously has to be paid for, and we will, other things being equal, unless we can borrow at zero interest rates, need some growth and some headroom to engage these kind of fiscal policies in future. In terms of the taxation and subsidies point, that was really a more macro point about how we might rejig the capital stock away from a carbon-based infrastructure to one which is more sustainable, more green-friendly, if you like. So it was more a macro point than a specific point about the rural economy. But on the rural economy, I think, in terms of land use, obviously taxation and subsidies are important, as we've seen in terms of the way land is used. And we may want to think about that in terms of, as I think one of the commentators said in a written submission, the amount of land that's used to produce inputs into our whiskey and beer exports, which are obviously crucially important, could perhaps be put to better use in terms of food production and so on. So I think in terms of the micro aspect of subsidies and taxes, that's where we would want to have our focus on.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anybody want to come in on that point, or shall we move on to the next question? I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm going to go now to a question about milk. There was quite a lot of discussion about milk from our attendees, which is great to see. I understand from what I've read that the Welsh Government are inviting farmers to join a growing sheep dairy industry. There were suggestions that small micro dairies producing A2 milk would help repopulate smaller communities, again with sheep milk. I think I've learned that A2 milk is anything other than perhaps what you might think of as bog standard cow's milk, but if I'm wrong there, I'm sure someone will correct me very quickly. There's a discussion about the benefit of cows eating grazing land as well as cattle, and a question about whether Scotland should be producing more oat milk, which obviously wouldn't require sheep, cattle, goats, or anything else. Are all of these mutually exclusive, or are these different systems of milk production compatible? And what benefits do the panel think that they would bring in terms of other sustainable jobs in the wider rural economy? Who wants to? Mads has got his hand up.
I think Nikki was first.
I'll jump in after. No, I'll jump in after Mads. You go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nikki. I think, yeah, there is a room for a lot of different foodstuffs in our food system. What we are currently having is a food system that is too monolithic and have too little diversity. If you can make a living from making sheep's milk because it's profitable and it's good for your health, well, go ahead and do it. We can see in Scotland at the moment, well, the milk sector is actually making decent amounts of money. And if you're looking at milk, for instance, well, it's also a quite efficient way. If we are thinking conventional farming, it's a quite efficient way of getting proteins, because we both get proteins from the milk and from the beef, which means that the greenhouse gas emissions per protein produced is way reduced to traditional suckler beef farming, for instance. So I think everything related to milk, sheep's milk, cow's milk has its place in the future food system, but probably need to expect competition from alternative milks. As we can see now, it's just going completely crazy. We saw growth rates in Germany. In 5 years, the market for oat milk has grown by, I think, 600%. So it's just going off while traditional milk is going down. So you need to find your niche. You need to find your place in the market where you can generate enough value to support your livelihood and not depend on government subsidies to make a living.
Okay. Nikki, you wanted to come in on this point as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to keep my camera off just for the sake of keeping a connection, but agree with Mads that we need a diverse diet. And if people want to drink oat-derived liquids, then absolutely to do that. I would challenge the suggestion that they can be grown without the need for livestock, because they will need nutrition. So we need to think about how we don't then just rely on extractive synthetic fertilizers to produce those at scale. So I think, absolutely believe in agroecology would suggest that integrated mixed farming approaches are the way forward, and that links through to this diversity of diet, because if we can have cattle and or sheep on the same land where we're also going to be growing crops that might be used for various different foods as opposed to feeds, then we're able to spread risk across the farm business. We don't have to just focus on only producing one output. So I think that one of the challenges we have is that there seems to be an increased division between what's the right or correct or best diet, and actually a broader, more diverse diet and a range of businesses that cater for those diets is really, really important. And mixed farming can absolutely be a way that we can explore that further, rather than trying to map out where farming should and could happen and stick to that, and actually think more holistically about our farm systems.
Okay, Nikki, thank you very much for that. Don't know if anybody else on the panel wants to come in on that, or perhaps follow up with the next question. I think maybe this might be one for Davey to address. And again, I'm going to take a couple of the questions that have been asked in the chat and sort of bolt them together. The first is perhaps a recognition that the existing farming industry is probably quite a vested industry in terms of its size, scale, and attitude to profit generation. And the suggestion is, do we need a very strong steer from the Scottish Government in order to change the way that industry works, if that's what we're aiming at? And secondly, on the flip side of that is from one of our other attendees, their perception that amongst the general population of Scotland, there's perhaps either, they say, a general apathy about these issues, but it may also be just a lack of detailed knowledge. What can we start to do to change that? And is there a place for SEDA land in that?
Yes, thanks, Richard. So working back, I think, then yes, it's been well recognised over the years that there is a disconnect between our farming systems in Scotland and what the wider public understand or don't understand about those sort of systems. How we fix that is a big question, but certainly if we had a clearer, wider range of outputs being expected from our farming or land management practices, that would go one way, I would suggest, to actually help raise awareness. There'll always be a certain section of the wider public that are not going to be interested at all in knowing more about what's actually happening, you know, how their food is produced or other products are produced within Scotland. But certainly there is a need to actually raise awareness, raise greater awareness. And if we had more individuals within the wider public not only understanding what our current farming systems are producing and what they're capable of producing differently in the future, that would actually add impetus to the first point of your question in terms of encouraging and getting a much greater steer from Scottish Government in terms of not just that change is needed, we hear that all the time from Scottish Government and their agencies, but actually how they will look to encourage and implement that change going forward. We have had quite a focus in recent months, and it is months, on seeking advice from within the farming industry in terms of how they see that they could change going forward to help Scotland reach net zero by 2045, how they can actually propose some element of action on the ground, changes on the ground, to actually show that Scotland is looking to step up to the mark in advance of COP26. But I think Mads either said it or certainly replied to a question in the chat. We are certainly not there yet in terms of the industry, farming industry as a whole, accepting the need for change, let alone accepting or recognising what direction any one individual business can actually take. We've now got, just recently announced an agricultural, sorry, I'll need to read it because Scottish Government have the tendency to have long names for boards and panels. We now have an Agriculture Reform Implementation Oversight Board, which is, I did read it, Mads, which is badged as actually helping suggest what could be done in advance of COP26 to actually increase the impetus on change at a farm level with regard to climate change emissions, which, if that can be achieved within the next couple of months, is great. But if you've been watching the chat, you'll have already seen, I think it was from Bruce Wilson and possibly others, there is an ongoing concern that focusing solely on climate change and making climate change the sole rationale for land use and land use change in Scotland in the future is going to miss out a wide range of other opportunities: biodiversity, and the repeopling and the rewilding, etc., that and reforesting that we've actually talked about, partly here and partly in the report itself. So to answer your question more clearly, we need leadership, strong leadership from Scottish Government in terms of the direction of travel, and the framework that they are going to put in place to actually help facilitate the change. And the report is suggesting what type of sub-elements of that framework that could be put in place. And certainly SEDA and SEDA Land have a role to play in helping to continually send that message out both to Scottish Government and to the general public.
Fantastic. Thank you, Davey. That brings us very neatly to the end of our discussion session. So thank you for that. Thank you to everyone on the panel, and for the level of interest and questions shows, I think, the need for SEDA Land. Now, I am conscious there are quite a few people joining the meeting quite late on. I understand from our backroom team that some of the publicity that went out about the meeting suggested it would start at 5 o'clock. We did actually start at 4 o'clock. So apologies to anyone who's joining late because they had that message. We are recording this event, and it will be available as soon as we can upload it to the SEDA website. Recommend anyone who's missed out does go back and take the time to watch the event, as we've had some fantastic speakers and interesting discussion raised. And all the chat that's still coming in will be uploaded to the SEDA website, and we will work our way through those questions. So we now come to the second of our world premiere poems this afternoon, entitled Here Together in This Place. Again, it's read to us by its author, Sophie Cook. Sophie also shared with us 3 of her poems during the 6 conversations, and is a poet, novelist, and associate lecturer in creative writing with the Open University, who also commissioned this work. Sophie.
Thanks very much. The poem really touches on interconnectedness. I'm a poet. I also have a bit of a background in ecology, so obviously that's central to ecological concepts, but also it was something that really came across strongly in the land conversations, this need for an interconnected approach, and I have so much respect for how that was achieved during the conversations. Thought it was excellent. And so the poem, I guess, is about the urgent need for a better way of living as part of nature, and incorporating some of the practical things that came out of our chats. So here's the poem. Here together in this place. You can't separate the river from the rocks beneath it, or sunlight from the leaf, the earth from your bloodstream. The partitioned oil slick that sits on top of everything is not us, it's a vision. Oil does not belong here, nor the plastic things we make from it and liquids. They do not fit in at all when they are finished, sit detached in time, unable to die, mess with our real world's functioning. We are different. We belong to this place. It's in our nature to join the world around us to ourselves. It is our air, our food, our bones and blood. This place and the way we live, why should they be separate? The way we live, so much the same, one oily borrowing spread across everything. This place and the way we live will be joined and different, as every place is different, each twist and rise and nook. The things that are around us, lignin, bracken, wool, stretched to furnish many needs, our waste, food for something else, taken into the heartbeat of the world that's living. We'll join this sun, earth, water, wind to our skin, make of these things a blessed heat to warm ourselves in winter, join the rocks, soil, roots to our blood in the food we eat, take in the light on this landscape, breathe, in, out, give, take. This is our existence. Like in nature, each part is needed. Each voice a drop of water in the river, that weaves together rain and sea. This place will be our place, this corner, and all the voices, all the life within it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. That was fantastic. And thank you for reminding us again how people, place and nature are intertwined, and to ignore one ignores all of them. Finally, I'm going to turn back to Gail, who will tell us more about SEDA Land and how to get involved. But to start that, I'm going to ask Gail a question. Are you pleased with the response to the 6 conversations that SEDA have had? And what are your hopes for the report and its output and SEDA Land? Gail.
Yes, I am very delighted. Thank you, Richard. When we embarked on the land conversations, we had no idea where they were going or how big they'd become. And I have to say that I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the number of people that have wanted to speak, and not just wanting to speak, but the passion which they have spoken, which was a prerequisite. I have to say, they know that passion and provocation were the 2 words I repeated ad infinitum in the briefings, but the way that they all engaged and discussed things, and they seemed to really enjoy talking to other people from other disciplines, which is just what it was about. So we had academics, we had some policymakers, we had foresters, farmers, people with health and well-being, we had practitioners, we had land managers, we had all these people talking together. And the enthusiasm that they generated was what made us realize we can't stop with the report. I thought the report was going to be the end of it, but no, we absolutely had to harness the enthusiasm and the energy that was generated, hence SEDA Land. So to talk about SEDA Land, Richard, the aims are threefold. First of all, it's about designing and testing imaginative solutions, and that's testing an idea against all the other disciplines that we talked about in the conversation. So something might work for carbon storage, but does it work for health and well-being? Does it work for the local community? Then it's also, secondly, to broaden people's awareness through events like this. And I hope that the format of the conversations has been very popular. And so I hope to repeat that for each initiative that we take forward. And then thirdly, and most importantly, it's to affect policy change. That's the bottom line of what we want, because only by affecting policy change can we really make the change that we need to as urgently as we need to. You might ask, why do we need another organisation? And believe me, I've asked this quite a few times of a lot of the panelists. We had some focus groups afterwards. Do you want something formed at the end of this? Why do you need it? You've got the Scottish Rural College already doing things, and all the other great organisations. And we were told absolutely there is a need, because this is interdisciplinary and because it's multi-sectoral. There are very few organisations doing that, and that seems to be quite novel. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and we're not trying to duplicate what other organisations done. As Mad said, all the research has been done, it's out there, but it's what we do with it. I think that SEDA is particularly well placed to do this, because as designers, we are used to thinking imaginatively, and we're used to thinking out of the box. And we're also used to thinking or tackling problems in an interdisciplinary way. So that comes naturally to us. The other thing we've been told time and time and again, that people like the fact that we are doing this because we are independent. We don't have any affiliations with the land sectors at the moment, and we are political. So I think that puts us in good stead, because it is a very political thing. I mean, that shocked me, actually, hearing how much politics and how one group won't talk to another. I mean, it's crazy. So SEDA Land this is the launch of it, as Richard said. We've already got a steering group set up, and lots of these wonderful people that we've heard speaking today are in the steering group. So Mads, Davy, Ronald and Nikki are all on it. I have noticed on Twitter that there have been a few comments about lack of somebody in the forestry sector. Well observed. You're already on our case. If you're interested in joining the steering group, there are still vacancies. We can still take a few more people, and that is certainly something we lack at the moment. And absolutely, we welcome everyone from different sectors. That's exactly what we're about. So we don't want to miss anyone out. We've had already quite a few people volunteering, which is fantastic, and thank you so much to all of you who have come forward and offered to help. We're looking for volunteers both with the general sort of running of the group, but also people with expertise. And we've had people from, for example, the James Hutton Institute and the SRUC already coming, as well as people from communities all around Scotland. And brilliant, and please, more of you sign up. We are having our first steering group meeting at the end of this month. And after that, we'll be getting back to you with a better idea of how we will use all of your expertise and time. I mean, just as an example, I had my hand up at the end there, but I was too late in the Q&A. But just to show you the way that we think that will be different is when someone put a question about how do you engage people? Well, we had several ideas thrown at us in the conversations. Andrew Whitley from Bread Matters said, if every primary school has a field or use of a field that they can grow their own wheat, make their own bread, and then sit down and eat their bread with the community. Imagine they will be growing mixed grains that'll have healthy food that's local, and they'll be sharing it with people. It was a wonderful example of how you might do that. But I was also thinking that for example, I've just had a week in Glenfeshie, and I was talking to Peter Cairns about rewilding, and he was saying that Cumbernauld apparently are going to be rewilding. Well, if we actually engage people, like with growing your own bread, your grain for bread, or we take rewilding into the cities, I know it potentially can be a controversial thing, but just at simplest level, that you let the verges grow in the cities, you let any wasteland start becoming a place for biodiversity with butterflies and bees, then you get the people in the city seeing what that means. They start understanding the concept. And if they understand the concept in the city, they're going to understand it in the countryside. But then also something that Sarah Ann Monnes said in the health and well-being one, if people start prescribing going to the countryside as a health remedy, so that's instead of waiting for a cure, you send people out there before the problem emerges, then again, they start seeing the benefits of what a wonderfully diverse, biodiverse landscape can look like, and they start valuing it. So I see that engaging people in the land in these various different strategies, that's how you engage them. I mean, other taxes and things, yes, we do that too, but we start engaging people, and that includes people in the cities as well. The only other thing I'd say to call for organizations to come to us who may have partially developed initiatives. We can test the viability against the various parameters I've talked about, and we can help raise awareness of the issues in the general public through conversations and other events. So to sum up, I think it's a really exciting time to be looking at land use, because I have a vision of a Scotland that looks very, very different, and it's very exciting. It's got to change the way that we use it. It's got to change radically, and it's got to change now. And I hope that SEDA Land will be able to help affect that change. So thank you everyone for coming, and hope you join us.
And fantastic. Thank you, Gail, for that summing up, and also the reminder of those stories. And sorry, I didn't see your hand go up during the discussion. Obviously, I'm going to remind everyone to download and read the report, or even better, purchase it online for a hard copy while stocks last. It also only leaves me to thank all of the speakers that we've heard from today: Deb, Davey, Ronald, Nikki, Mads and Gail, and our poets, Chris and Sophie, for delivering their pieces so beautifully, both of which, of course, you can read again in the report. And in a few days, you'll be able to watch again when the recording of this event is posted on the SEDA Resources webpage. So again, I'd like to apologise anybody who joined the event late because they thought it was being held later on. I'd also like to thank our back of house team of David, Rosanna and Eleanor for keeping everything running and handling all the queries. Also, Simon Francis of Campaign Collective for his great work on organising the publicity around the report. I think this is the first time that we as SEDA have done this and sort of explicitly had some professional help, and I think that has paid dividends in terms of the number of people who have been able to attend this afternoon. We'd also like to thank, again, our main sponsors whose funds enabled this report to be written, the Pebble Trust, Wildland Limited, and the Open University. Please do get in touch if you want to know more about SEDA or to express an interest in being involved in SEDA Land. Full details are on the concluding slide coming up now. Your support is vital to making events like today, the 6 conversations and the report, New Vision for Land in Use in Scotland, the way forward, happening. SEDA is open to everyone to join. It gives you access to all our events and our magazines, and subscriptions start from as little as £15 per year for the unwaged. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and contributing, and we hope to see you either involved in SEDA Land or in one of our upcoming events, including our next publication launch for the SEDA Guide to Indoor Air Quality in a month's time, or actual live events on the Fringe at COP26 in Glasgow, one of which will be on land issues. Please do now leave the Zoom room yourself when you have our details. Many thanks and goodbye for now.